special report.
Two new studies were published today on the links between television coverage of suicide and subsequent teenage suicide rates. The New England Journal of Medicine reports that both studies suggest that some teenagers might be more likely to take their own lives after seeing TV programs dealing with suicide. NPR's Laura Garrett reports.
The first suicide study, done by a team from the University of California in San Diego, examines television news coverage of suicides. David Phillips and Lundi Carstensen looked at 45 suicide stories carried on network newscasts between 1973 and 79. The researchers then compared the incidence of teen suicides in those years to the dates of broadcast of these stories. David Phillips says news coverage of suicides definitely prompted an increase in the number of teens in America who took their lives.
The more TV programs that carry a story, the greater the increase in teen suicides just afterwards.
The suicide increase among teens was compared by Phillips to adult suicide trends.
Teen suicides go up by about 2.91 teen suicides per story, and adult suicides go up by, I think, around 2 adult suicides per story. The increase for teens, the percentage increase for teens is very, very much larger than the percentage increase for adults. It's about, I think, 14 or 15 times as big a response for teens, percentage-wise, as it is for adults.
The TV news coverage appears to have prompted a greater increase than is seen around other well-known periods of adolescent depression, such as holidays, personal birthdays, the start of school, and winter. Phillips could not find any specific types of stories that seemed to trigger a greater response among depressed teens. Phillips says it seems to simply be the word suicide and the knowledge that somebody actively executed the act that pushes buttons in depressed teenagers. Psychiatrists call this imitative behavior.
What my study showed was that there seems to be imitation not only of relatively bland behavior like dressing or hairstyles, but there seems to be imitation of really quite deviant behavior as well. Teenagers imitate apparently across the board, not just suicides, but everything else as well.
In a separate study, Madeline Gould and David Schaefer of Columbia University found that made-for-television movies about suicide also stimulated imitative behavior, even though the movies were intended to portray the problem of teen suicide and offered, in some cases, suicide hotline numbers and advice on counseling. The team believes the 4 network movies prompted 80 teen suicides. One of the made-for-TV movies examined by the Columbia University team was a CBS production. George Schweitzer, a CBS vice president, is well aware of this research. He says it is terribly unfortunate that any teens took their lives after the broadcast. But if they had it to do over, says Schweitzer, CBS would still run the movie.
Studies like these do not measure what we think is the most important thing, which I don't think can be measured, and that is the hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of teenagers who were positively moved by these kinds of broadcasts.
Moved to call suicide hotlines, moved to seek counseling, and moved to discuss their depressions with family members. Schweitzer does not dispute today's studies. Some teens may be moved to suicide.
But ignoring the issue for fear of that, I think, would be far more disastrous than addressing important social issues to help create awareness and, again, to have a positive effect.
But researcher David Phillips suggests the media could decrease the teen suicide problem by avoiding some suicide stories altogether and changing the way others are covered. For example, says Phillips, don't make suicide seem heroic. He cites the story of a young Czechoslovakian dissident who set himself on fire. But the dissident's action was taken to draw attention to government repression in Czechoslovakia. Should the news media really have ignored such a story?
I think it's a really difficult question. There are all these goods on all sides of the issue, and thank God I don't have to be the one to disentangle that issue.
One prominent expert in this field says the young people moved to take their lives following a news story or movie are particularly vulnerable, suicidal individuals. In the absence of television stories, some other events in their lives might well have triggered their actions. So while most psychiatrists agree there is an imitative component to teenage suicides, that tendency, they say, should not lead society to repress information. On the contrary, some say we are now facing a major epidemic of adolescent suicide in America. We must publicize and confront the problem. Last year, some 5,500 adolescents between 15 and 24 years of age took their lives. At least 10 times that tried. Some estimates are that 275,000 teens attempted suicide last year. The rate of teenage suicide in America has tripled since 1955.